of Lindsay Clancy. Want to talk a little bit more about the background of this case that has really captured national attention. Now, they're set to begin. Lindsay Clancy is a Massachusetts mother accused of strangling her 3 young children. Proceedings are expected to resume around 9 a.m. there in a Plymouth Superior Court. The prosecution and defense will each have an hour to make their final case before the jury receives instructions and begins deliberating. Now, we know that Clancy, who is 36 years old, has pleaded not guilty or not criminally responsible, with her lawyers arguing that she was experiencing postpartum psychosis when she killed her 3 children, one who was 5 years old, the other a 3-year-old, and then an 8-month-old. This happened at the family's home in coastal Duxbury in January of 2023 before attempting suicide. Now, postpartum psychosis is a rare mental illness that is linked to stress, sleep deprivation, and hormonal changes that follow childbirth. Prosecutors say that Clancy planned the killings and understood her actions were wrong. If convicted, she faces a mandatory life prison sentence, but if jurors find her not guilty because she lacked criminal responsibility, she would not face prison time but could be committed to a psychiatric facility. So as closing arguments are set to begin, let's talk a little bit about what we can expect. So joining us next into the program, just to discuss really the focus of this entire case and Lindsay Clancy herself, we have Mark Astor. He is a criminal defense attorney, and he joins me now. Mark, good morning. Thanks for taking the time. So you heard me there. I had an entire background. Let's just start, though. I mean, this trial is in its 5th week, right? It's been going on for a while. Clancy did not testify in this. We did hear, though, the defense calling about 10 witnesses. Prosecutors, they called about 70 witnesses, both of which included family, friends, relatives, also doctors, psychiatrists, psychologists that could testify to this mental health of Lindsay Clancy. Can you help our viewers kind of understand the complexities of having a defendant that is using this as the argument to not be found criminally responsible, specifically when we're talking about mental health?
Yeah, this is a fascinating case, Carell. I tried, an attempted first-degree murder case with an insanity defense when I was prosecutor, and these are challenging from the defense perspective. But I think the difference between what I tried as a former prosecutor and what we've seen here is there is a lengthy history where the defense witnesses have talked about her history of mental illness. I mean, she sought treatment 3 times in the month leading up to this crime where the children were killed. And apparently nobody kept her in long enough to keep her. So this is part of the defense strategy, right? They're saying, look, this is an indictment of the system. This is somebody who was telling us that she was sick, that she was having problems, and nobody stepped in to help her. And as a result of this, she was hearing voices that were telling her to kill her own children. And then afterwards, she threw herself out of a window after apparently stabbing herself. So there's a really strong case here for insanity. There really is. Now, on the other side, you've got the prosecutor saying, look, hold on a second. We get it. She was sick. She was ill. There was even a history here, but she still had the state of mind where she could understand the difference between right and wrong, and she's criminally responsible, even if she did have a mental illness. And therefore, she needs to be held accountable for the fact she killed her own 3 children. She sent her husband out to pick up food and a prescription. Apparently, while this was going on, I think there's some evidence she may even have made a phone call to him. And so the fact that she went down to do it in the basement, knowing that when he came in, he wouldn't necessarily find the children straight away, they're going to argue, look, that's her state of mind. That's what was really going on here. Forget the whole she didn't know what she was doing. She didn't understand right from wrong. She planned it. This was premeditated, and you should find her guilty.
So there we're just running through really just the focus of both the defense and the prosecution ahead of closing arguments. I want to point out also, Mark, that at the bottom of the screen, We're asking our viewers to kind of weigh in on this case. It's something we have been showcasing throughout our program the last several weeks. We want to know from them, what do you think will be the outcome of the Lindsay Clancy trial? Guilty, not guilty, or a hung jury? I want to talk about this hung jury option that we have here, because there has been a lot of debate of this case. Obviously, social media kind of goes crazy when it sees these high profile and really horrific crimes, just dissecting every little bit that we are informed of as the public. So when we talk about a hung jury, I mean, what are we saying with that exactly? And what would be the next steps if that were the case?
So, when it comes to any type of finding of guilt, it's going to have to be unanimous. All of the jurors are going to have to agree. So if one says, hold on a second, I don't agree, you're not going to have a unanimous verdict unless for some reason the defense would waive that. And I can't imagine why they would ever do that. So they're going to say, look, we have, a bunch of jurors here that agree, convict, and a bunch of jurors over here, or even one juror who says, we're not going to convict. And now you have a situation where you don't have a unanimous verdict, and that's a hung jury. So I think if we get that, and I don't think we will, but if we do, then the Commonwealth's going to have a decision. Do you want to retry this case? And I would imagine they will. They're simply not going to walk away from the fact you have 3 dead children. So if we get a hung jury, we'll probably find ourselves back in trial in the next couple of months. Personally, I think they're probably going to convict her. I know how difficult it was, from the defense perspective, when I prosecuted this attempted first-degree murder with an insanity defense, and we have 3 dead children here. I do not believe they're going to let her off the hook. I'm sorry. Now, is there a middle ground? Yeah, maybe. My understanding is that the judge is going to give them a manslaughter instruction, which would remove the premeditation away. That might be a middle ground that the jury can come to and say, look, do we really want to convict her of first-degree or even second-degree murder? I don't know. Do we think she was insane? Probably not. In terms of how does she meet the legal criteria for insanity? Probably not. But there's a middle ground here, and it's a manslaughter conviction, which would, in theory, if she's at some point, she might be eligible for parole. Now, the jury's probably not going to know that because they're not involved in the sentencing at this point, but that might be the middle ground. They will probably convict her of something. I'm just not sure what it will be.
At the top of this conversation, I mentioned just how many witnesses were called by both the prosecutors and the defense, by also saying that, even though this case really, it involves Clancy's mental health, it is at the center of the trial. We heard testimony from medical professionals, also relatives and loved ones. Mark, how do testimonies from these 2 separate groups really apply, or how could they impact a juror and a jury pool when we think about convicting someone? Are they more moved by a medical professional, especially when we're talking about postpartum psychosis, or by relatives that personally know these people and the defendant at hand?
Yeah, look, I think it's a combination of both, Carell. I mean, in a case like this where you're claiming insanity, it's always going to be a battle of the experts. So the question is, do they believe the prosecution's experts versus the defense experts? I mean, I went back and listened to some of the testimony, and I think all of the experts have some credibility. I think, when Mr. Reddington cross-examined, especially the state's witnesses, he scored some points. Is it enough to affect the outcome of the case? Maybe, maybe not. I think Patrick testified, his mother testified, certainly humanizes her. She was a nurse, right? This is someone who cares for other people. Look how sick she must have been to commit this heinous crime. So I think it all helps. It all helps. But it really comes down to the fact you have 3 dead children, and I just don't see the jury allowing her to get away with it. Right? I just don't see it. And the insanity defense is, even though in Massachusetts the burden's on the state to prove that she was not insane, as opposed to the defense having the burden, I still don't. It's a very, very tough case to overcome from a defense perspective. I just don't see them allowing her to get away with this. I really don't. I think they'll convict her of something, probably.
I do want to point out once again the poll question at the bottom of the screen. We're asking viewers if they have kept up with the trial, what they think the outcome will be. 73% so far saying that she will be found guilty, 21% not guilty, and then 5% with a hung jury. We've been talking a lot about witness testimony, Mark, throughout this discussion. The trial in its 5th week right now. I'm wondering, though, if there is any particular testimony or other piece of evidence that really stood out to you because you have gone back and seen portions of this case.
Yeah, I think one of the things that really stuck out to me as somebody who spent almost 11 years now working in the behavioral health space is the fact that it appears that she was actually asking for help and nobody bothered. And I know a big part of the defense case is sort of this indictment of the system. I mean, she'd been at Mass General, she'd been at McLean, and 21 days before this, she left. McLean said, "Fine, you're good to go." Now, McLean, if they had thought that she was potentially a threat to herself or anybody else, could have Section 12'd her, which is the state's ability to basically detain her and lock her down. They didn't do that. The other issue is, why didn't somebody else from the family potentially file for guardianship over her and get her help? So if there's any sort of issue here in terms of the testimony, it's why didn't anybody step in to help her? This was avoidable and nobody did it. I mean, we can talk about the battle of the experts, Corral, but at the end of the day, you had a woman here who killed her children and nobody bothered to step in to save her. And as a result, we couldn't save the children. I think that's the biggest indictment of the whole case here. This was preventable and nobody did anything to stop it or help her. I mean, there's all this medication. It was almost like we were trying to medicate her out of her own psychosis, which is completely ridiculous. Nobody bothered to help her. That, to me, is the most damning testimony and evidence in the entire case. How the jury will look at that, I mean, that's going to be up to them. But this was preventable, Corral, and nobody bothered to help her.
I do want to bring it back to what we are expecting today, which is closing arguments. We've already heard the witness testimony. We've seen just all the evidence that has been presented. Today, both sides are going to be pleading their case, well, for the final day, I should say. Mark, if we look specifically at the defense, what is really going to be their focus to leave a lasting impression to possibly get the outcome they desire, which is she is not criminally responsible for these killings?
Yeah, I'm sure they're going to focus on the whole history of what was going on with her, the run up. This wasn't just a spur of the moment thing. There were all these red flags, and it culminated in the fact that she was, hearing these voices, this command hallucination where she was hearing voices to, instructing her to kill the children. And I'm sure Mr. Reddington is going to argue at that point, because it's really that point we have to focus on, that point in time when the children were killed. She wasn't capable of even knowing right from wrong. She had no idea that this was a criminal action. She didn't know what she was doing. She was just simply listening to the voices, and then she went and tried to take her own life. So they're going to focus on that, and I'm sure he's going to talk about the fact that not only were there red flags, but that nobody bothered to save her. Part of the theory of defense is that has been his indictment of the entire system, and he's not wrong. He's not wrong about that. So I think that's going to be the focus from the defense. From the prosecutor's side, they're going to say, look, she planned this. I get it. She was mentally ill. It's not unusual for women who have postpartum depression to experience these issues. I've represented a couple of them myself. But that doesn't mean to say she didn't understand what she was doing. In fact, she sent him out to go get food and medication. And she took him to the basement where nobody would hear them screaming. And that was her real state of mind.
Mark Astor, a criminal defense attorney, also a former prosecutor. Mark, I do appreciate you taking the time to talk about this case. It's really made so many headlines. We're following it very closely here, and today are those closing arguments. So we look forward to checking in with you as this case develops and many other trials that we follow.
Thanks, Carell.
Of course. I want to bring us back out, though, to some of the images that I was showcasing throughout this conversation and point out once again the poll question that we had to our viewers at the bottom of the screen, which is, what do you think will be the outcome of the Lindsay Clancy trial? We had three options: guilty, not guilty, or a hung jury. So far, 72% of you say that she will be found guilty, 21% saying not guilty, 7% thinking it's going to end with a hung jury. A reminder that if she is convicted of murder, Clancy faces a mandatory life prison sentence. If jurors find her not guilty because she lacked criminal responsibility, she would not face prison time, but could be committed to a psychiatric facility.